welcome to the How Do I Knit That podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Dawn of Sarah Dawn's Designs, and this 15th episode of the How Do I Knit That podcast is all about socks. It will discuss the basic construction of socks, the various ways to knit socks, and how to care for your hand knit socks when all is said and done. So, broadly, what is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast came about because I hear so many people saying, "Oh, I could never knit that. Oh, I could never make that." And I think that's really sad. I'm a firm believer in the idea that anyone can knit or crochet or quilt or whatever your chosen art is. All it takes is some knowledge, the right tools, the right techniques, and the willingness to get a little ingenious. If you're looking for the previous podcast episodes, you can find them on my Patreon, which I will link to in the description, or in a YouTube playlist, which I will also link to in the description. So, let's start with what, at its very basic form, is a sock? Well, simplistically, a sock is a tube. That's it. And indeed, you will find some patterns for tube socks, which are just a tube. Sometimes the toes will be closed off, sometimes they won't. You can either knit this tube in the round or seam it and knit it flat. Commonly, socks are knit in the round to avoid the seam, but you will see socks knit other ways too, including some more unusual designs like the double helix socks, knit from the heel out. The two most common methods are knitting from the toe up or from the cuff down, and this episode will cover both. But no matter how they are made, at the end of the day you end up with a tube that has one end for the toes, usually closed, and, with the exception of tube socks, one bend in it, the heel. So, first, let's talk about the exception of tube socks and why, honestly, they're not the best sock design, excepting a few specific use cases. Tube socks have no heel shaping. This means that their fit will leave something to be desired. They work great for babies or for some slipper patterns where fit is less of an issue, but for any sock you're going to be wandering around doing stuff in, the heel will be too ill-fitting to be comfortable. Ever worn socks that are too big? It's a very similar problem. The advantage is that they're absurdly easy because all you're doing is knitting a tube in the round. If you make the socks toeless, aka yoga socks, you don't even have to worry about decreasing for the toes either. So, for someone who's intimidated by the shaping of more traditional socks, tube socks can be a great way to get them started on knitting socks and making it a little more approachable. Oh, and remember how I mentioned babies? Well, they're not exactly doing any walking around in those socks. Those socks are mostly there for looks and warmth. A tube sock doesn't have any shaping to disrupt a stitch pattern, so a teeny pair of lace baby socks is much easier to work when you don't have any heel shaping to mess with your lace. Plus, the tube socks, because they're an easy fit, are also easy for parents to get on and off the little one's feet. So tube socks definitely have their place. That said, anecdotally, I think most socks have some form of heel. So let's talk about the different types of heels. 1. Afterthought heels. Continuing from the tube socks, afterthought heels are exactly that, heels done after you knit the main body of the sock. Well, how does that work? Easy. Knit the tube, but put in a single row of stitches on scrap yarn where you want your heel to go. Once the tube part of the sock is done, go back, remove the scrap yarn, and pick up the live stitches that are left on each side. Then work a heel. Usually, an afterthought heel is done with short rows, but you can actually insert other heel types if you like. There will be more on different heel types a little bit further into the podcast. The advantage of this method is that it doesn't disrupt the pattern. So if you're using self-striping or gradient sock yarn, you can work your heel with a contrast color of yarn, and your stripes or gradient will line up perfectly. This also applies to the toe of the sock as well. You can leave your stitches live when you're done the tube, then work a toe in the contrasting color if you want. The disadvantage of this method is that you have to pick up those live stitches from the scrap yarn, and if those stitches have been done in pattern, it can be very challenging to make sure you've got them all and that they haven't accidentally been twisted. I did an afterthought thumb, same idea, in a pair of very finely knit 3-color Fair Isle gloves, and never again. So it's not my preferred method, but some people adore it, and it does let you control your colors a lot better than some of the other heel methods. 2. Short row heels. Since I mentioned it earlier, the short row heel is usually what's used with an afterthought heel. Simplistically, you leave the stitches on the instep, aka the top of the foot, on a spare needle or stitch holder, then work the heel flat, working short rows in both directions, shaping the heel from a flat tube into more of a proper heel. The placing and number of short rows can vary wildly, but usually a small portion of the center stitches of the heel will form the center point, that is, where the most additional rows have been worked. This corresponds approximately to the ball of the heel. Advantages here are that it's easy. You don't need to know other techniques, unlike with a heel flap and gusset heel, which we'll cover next. You just have to know how to do short rows, and there are lots and lots of YouTube tutorials. If you don't know how to do short rows, well, I could make an entire podcast episode on short rows. Ooh, no, that's an idea for an episode. But instead, I'll link you to some wonderful video tutorials for the 3 most common short row techniques I've seen: wrap and turn short rows, German short rows, and Japanese short rows. The links should be in the episode description. There are other short row methods as well, so if none of those techniques work for you, let me know down in the comments and we can dive into even more short row techniques at a later date. 3. Heel flap and gusset heel. This sort of heel is commonly seen on cuff down socks, and I confess this is the first way I learned to knit socks, and it's the way I'm most familiar with. You work from the cuff of the sock down to just before the heel will start. Then you knit back and forth, forming a flap of fabric that goes down the back of the foot to the heel, hence the term heel flap. Then you work short rows to decrease and shape the heel before increasing stitches by picking up along the edges of that heel flap. Usually, the edge stitches of a heel flap will be slipped in order to make this easier, but they don't have to be. Finally, the gusset stitches are decreased until you have the correct shaping and number of stitches. This creates a bend in the sock that forms the heel. The advantages are that it is a more adjustable fit than the short row heel. You can tweak the length of the heel flap, heel turn, and the slope of the gusset with far more ease than you can tweak such things for a short row heel. It also lends itself nicely from a design perspective to design elements on the heel flap or in the gusset decreases. It also, especially if you slip the stitches of the heel flap and turn, is more durable than a standard short row heel as well. However, it will disrupt the striping of self-striping or long color run yarns much more than a short row heel. It also requires knowledge of picking up and knitting stitches, which is something that many knitters find intimidating. I promise it's not. I've heard people mention that you can do a heel flap and gusset heel for a toe-up sock, though I've personally yet to see a sock pattern that does this. If you know one, shout it out in the comments, please. Here's a guide written by the incomparable Kate Atherley and published in Modern Daily Knitting as to how you can, in fact, insert a heel flap and gusset heel into a toe-up sock, and I'll put a link to that in the description. 4. Fleegle Heel. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a heel type I've heard much about, but never tried, so I had to do some research to talk about it. There's a link for a basic Fleegle Heel formula in the description as well. You work toe up until you reach the front of your ankle. The formula page linked in the description also has some handy estimates if you're gift knitting and can't easily measure your recipient's foot. Increase for your gusset, then turn your heel with short rows and decreases. It's a variation of a short row heel, but because it creates the gusset as well, it can interrupt the color patterns of self-striping and gradient yarns. It's also completely doable as a cuff down version as well. Work to where your ankle meets the top of the foot. Work your increases for the gusset. Work the heel with short rows and decreases, then continue the sock. The nice thing about the Fleegle heel is that it's 1 row shorter than most traditional heels, and this helps eliminate the small hole that can form at the gusset when you rejoin your work and continue in the round. 5. Fish Lips Kiss Heel. This is another one I haven't tried yet. I know there are some patterns out there that use it, but I have not yet. The actual heel instructions are available on Ravelry as a paid download. No link, sadly, as Ravelry is unfortunately still a seizure risk. See episode 13 for all about that debacle and what to do about it. But you can search Fish Lips Kiss Heel on Ravelry if Ravelry is safe for you to use, and it will come right up. But like a lot of things in knitting, the Fish Lips Kiss Heel is just an invention and variation of an existing technique, in this case a short row heel. The big difference is a 1-inch fake heel flap knitting the instep, the top of the foot, in pattern and the heel stitches in stocking stitch. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard short row heel, just using a set of new to me stitches called twin stitches or shadow wraps. I'd never even heard of this short row method, so there's a YouTube tutorial in the description for the curious, which adds to the number of short row methods I know. That said, the pattern you can get on Ravelry does also come with instructions that have you make a precision cardboard cutout to model people's feet, so you can use that as a guide for fitting socks. Not just for yourself, but for the other folks in your life that you knit socks for too. I haven't tried it myself, but people do speak well of it. If any of you have tried the cardboard feet cutouts for sizing, let me know what you think in the comments below. But I think that's enough babbling about sock heels. On to the other big distinguishing thing about sock patterns and the age-old debate between sock knitters, toe up or cuff down. However, before I get into that debate, I want to remind folks about why I created this podcast. I intend to talk about all sorts of knitting, crochet, and crafting stuff so that you can create amazing things in whatever situation you're in. Remember, you can, in fact, knit that. And when I say knit that, I also mean crochet that or spin that. It applies to pretty much any craft I can think of. And for those things to talk about, I'll be relying on you, my listeners, and my audience. I want to hear what keeps you from knitting or crocheting, and I'll try and address the barriers you mentioned. It can be anything at all. I'll at least try and give you some advice. If you're having trouble with a particular technique, are wondering how to knit with limited or no time, or can't find tools that work for you, please reach out and I'll try and address your concern on the podcast. I'll even do pattern support, provided the pattern is free online and accessible to me, or one I can find at my local library. And of course, I'm able to answer questions about my own designs as well. You can submit your questions by email and have them be read on the show, or you can submit an MP3 voice recording and I'll play it on the podcast. So, with that reminder, let's keep going and talk about the two most common sock variations in terms of general construction, toe up or cuff down, and what the advantages and disadvantages of each are. Cuff down. This is what I first learned and the only way I made socks for years. It's also what I'm more familiar with in terms of designing as well. It seems, at least in my anecdotal experience, to be taught primarily using double points, so it might be that if you're a double pointed needle user, that correlates to learning cuff down socks first. I could also absolutely just be inferring too much from my own experience, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in the comments. Anyway, cuff down is exactly what it sounds like. You start at the top of the sock and knit down, working the leg, the heel, the foot, and the toe. You then seam the toe closed, usually with either grafting or by doing a star toe. Wait, what is a star toe? Well, it's a less common method of finishing off a cuff down sock. It's where you work the toe decreases down to a small number of stitches. Cut your yarn, then feed that yarn through the stitches, pull it tight, and it cinches the stitches in. This is also commonly used to finish off a hat. Personally, I find this a bit more uncomfortable and a bit less fitted than a grafted toe because a grafted toe actually has a seam. It's a grafted seam, so it's invisible, but it's there, and it alters the fit. Cuff down socks have the advantage is that their cast on is a standard cast on the round. Toe up socks use a toe up sock cast on, more on that in a moment. The other thing to note about cuff down socks is that whatever stitch pattern you're working on will be upside down compared to how the sock will be worn. This can be a good thing or not, depending on what you make of the design. In addition, cuff down socks often, but not always, use the heel flap and gusset construction for their heel, which is often a better fit than a short row heel. Doing a heel flap and gusset heel in a toe up sock is doable, but much less common. Speaking of, what about toe up socks? Well, again, the name pretty much says it all. You start at the toe of the sock with either a toe up cast on, or you can use short rows and a provisional cast on to start your toe. I've linked a Knitting Magazine tutorial all about this in the description below. The stitch pattern is right side up, which is an advantage for us designers who are trying to visualize how a sock pattern will go together. And you work from the toe through the heel, then up the leg, casting off at the top cuff of the sock. The upsides are that you can have a bit more control over your yarn. With a pair of toe-up socks, you can work the leg of the socks until you run out of yarn. Or, if you're using only one skein, until you've used exactly half the skein, you can figure that out by weighing your skein. Don't worry, you can just use a basic kitchen scale. It will get you close enough for this purpose. You can't do that with cuff down socks. You'll end up with too long or too short a foot. You can also use the sock in progress to hold your working yarn. Once the toe of the sock gets big enough, you can just tuck your ball of yarn right inside the sock. It makes its own project bag. The downside is that most toe-up sock patterns use a short row heel, which can have fit issues, and that you have to be very careful with your cast off. If your cast off is too tight, your sock cuff won't have enough stretch to get over your foot, and your socks will be unwearable. Ask me how I learned that one? No, it wasn't from personal experience, I swear. Some people find that casting off on a slightly larger needle can help with that particular problem. In my case, once I switched to a more stretchy cast off, it wasn't an issue for my knitting. Well, that, and I didn't want to faff about looking for yet another pair of needles. So now that we've talked about toe up and cuff down socks, are there any other sock constructions? Yes, they're just less common. The next most common is heel out socks, which start at the heel and are worked out from there. A good example of this is the hat heel socks in Knitty Magazine. A link to the free pattern is in the description. And a fascinating two-color variant of heel out socks is the double helix socks. I mentioned them earlier and they're also linked in the description. There's also seamed socks. Often the heels are similar constructions to what we've already seen, just seamed. For example, Pearl Soho's seamed sock pattern, free pattern link in the description, uses a heel flap and gusset heel, just it's knit flat rather than in the round. The advantage of this particular construction is that you use a different yarn from the heel and the sole of the sock, which makes repairing these socks much easier. You can just re-knit the sole and heel and stitch it back in, which I think is absolutely genius. And there's probably many, many more different type of sock designs that I haven't heard about. If that's the case, that's another entry for the comments. I'd love to hear about it. Finally, let's talk sock care. So, you've put all this effort into knitting your socks. Now what? Well, the sock care and life of your socks starts with the yarn you pick before you even knit the sock. Pick a yarn that doesn't work for socks, and you'll have holes within weeks. When you're looking for a sock yarn, you want a yarn specifically made for socks. A beautiful, squishy, one-ply merino probably isn't durable enough to take the beating that socks need to take. Look for multi-ply yarns labeled specifically for socks, blended with nylon, silk, or mohair for strength, and designed to be knit at tight gauges. Speaking of gauge, it plays a role in the life of your sock too. Broadly speaking, the tighter your tension, the denser the fabric, and the longer the sock will last. Oh, and on the same note, wearing too loose-fitting socks? Yeah, that will also cause more friction between your foot, the sock, and the floor, and they'll wear out faster. If your socks don't fit when you're done knitting them, you do not have to simply put up with it like you do with ill-fitting commercial socks. You can unravel and reknit them until you get socks that actually properly fit your feet. You can take a bit of length off the foot if they're too long, take stitches out of the leg if they're too loose. There's lots of ways to adjust the fit of your socks. This means longer wearing socks. And considering the effort we make to knit pretty socks, we want them to last, right? The other thing that will ruin your socks, how you wear them. There's a big difference between something like bed socks, which won't see too much walking on them, versus heavy socks worn in steel-toe boots for 10-hour days. Even the difference between wood floor, tile floor, and carpet can have serious consequences for the life of your socks. If you have lots of hard flooring, tile, wood, concrete, slippers will help reduce the wear of your socks, and if it's warm enough and you're comfortable doing so, simply go barefoot rather than wear socks. If you know you're going to be wearing these for long days in work boots, look for a workhorse yarn and knit at a very snug gauge. Psst, you can also knit the slippers too. There's lots and lots of slipper patterns out there. But now that we've addressed the knitting and wear things you can do to help with the lifespan of your socks, let's talk how to actually wash your socks. The care instructions for your yarn should be on the ball band. If you've lost the ball band, you can probably look them up online wherever you got the yarn. The yarn shop or dyer's website should have that info, and if they don't, Yarn Sub, link in the description, or Ravelry will very likely have that information in their database. Please, again, only go to Ravelry if you'll know you'll be safe using it. Yarn Sub is my safer recommendation. Now, full transparency here. One, I don't hand wash my socks. Laundry is a daunting chore for my ADHD brain, so I don't want to make it any harder for myself, and I know I won't hand wash anything like socks. 2, I don't always take my own advice about ball bands and have thrown many a hand wash only item in the washing machine. 3. If I do that, I take responsibility for the risk of destroying the garment. This is why, despite what I just said, it's always a good idea to only use yarns that are listed as being machine washable. Otherwise, you do take a chance that you might just destroy your thing. Now, I've found many yarns are more durable than you might think, and I have run many a dry clean only knit through a gentle cycle in a machine. But yes, I have also felt that one thing doing so. I thought it would be okay, and spoiler, it wasn't. This is one of the rare times that if you want to take this chance, it can be worth it to wash your swatches first. But for socks, something that, for all they're pretty and fun to knit, they're also somewhat utilitarian. I want my socks to be easy care. So, my personal suggestion is that unless you know you're going to be hand washing your socks, there are some folks out there who do full respect to your brains for making that happen. Stick with machine washable sock yarn. There's lots and lots of it. One of my economical superwash favorites, if you're in North America, is Knit Pick Stroll. It also comes in hand painted tweed and tonal colors too. And if you don't want superwashable, there's a few different varieties of non-superwashable as well. Tennis Fiber Arts makes a wonderful non-superwash, non-felting sock wool in their Pure Wash sock. While Briggs & Little Durasport makes a workhorse sock that, well, officially you're supposed to hand wash, I've machine washed my Briggs & Little knits for years and never had an issue with them felting. Actually, I've had the opposite. I've learned the hard way that Briggs & Little wool is very, very difficult to felt. And yes, links to both yarns will be in the ever-growing list of links in the description. And any cotton elastic blend, for the non-wool folks out there, will very likely be fine in a cold water washing machine, but again, check your ball band just to be sure. And where you can, likely run socks with small amounts of alpaca or cashmere through a gentle or wool cycle in a machine. You are taking a chance unless the yarn specifically says it's machine washable. Pay attention to the drying instructions too. Some blends of elastic don't do well in the heat of the dryer, but conversely, superwash wool actually often benefits from a round in the dryer to help it spring back into shape. I don't do this for my own socks unless I found they've gone slouchy, but it's definitely a thing. The heat of the dryer can also damage animal fibers. Actually, it damages pretty much every type of fabric over time. It's why it's generally suggested to line dry your clothes for longevity in general. But delicate things like silk, as well as elastic and nylon, are more likely to be damaged by the heat. If you're in a position where you have to use a dryer, see if your dryer has a setting for no heat or low heat, and you don't need any fancy laundry stuff like dryer sheets or fabric softener to keep your socks clean. On that note, do you need a wool wash detergent for your socks? If you have it, it won't hurt, provided your socks are actually wool, but it's not a necessity. A basic gentle laundry detergent will do just fine. Now, yes, technically it will strip a bit more lanolin from the wool, but most wool is scoured and cleansed well before it makes it into yarn. If you have a minimally processed or very rustic wool yarn, then you might want to consider a wool wash. Just make sure you get one that is specifically helping preserve the lanolin in the wool. And the advantage to using a regular laundry detergent is then your socks can just go in with your regular laundry. One less thing to sort is a win in my book. Well, anyway, I think that just about wraps up the podcast. A huge thanks to my patrons who've supported this podcast. You folks can submit an MP3 audio or MP4 video file of your questions for the podcast over on Patreon. The podcast archive is available on my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/SarahDonsDesigns, and future episodes will be available here on YouTube as well. Patrons usually get access on the second Wednesday of every other month, and the podcast is available to the public a week after that, so the third Wednesday of every other month. Well, that's it for episode 15. Follow or subscribe to be notified for the next episode, and thank you once again for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and remember, you can, in fact, knit that. Happy crafting!